So I recorded the whole thing and I totally forgot to give this preface. Do keep in mind that the ship is a work in progress. This is currently a preview. Things can and will change. From what I've heard, that there might be some changes for this particular ship already coming in the works soon. And of course, the ship was provided to me by Wargaming to test and preview. So that's it. Let's get started. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another ship review episode. And today we are looking at the very first Italian ship to appear in World of Warships. And that would be this Tier 6 light cruiser, the Duca D'Aosta. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to look at her from the port view, point out everything that's significant, and then of course take her into battle and show you how she performs in actual combat. So first things first, let's take a look at her survivability. Now in terms of her HP, depending on if you want to count the Graf Spee or not, because you know the Graf Spee is a bit of an odd ship, the Duca D'Aosta in terms of all the standard cruisers comes in at number 3 on the list in terms of HP, which isn't too bad. In terms of her armor, her armor's okay. It can be a little bit trollish at times, and generally speaking, if you angle, she is reasonably effective against cruisers and destroyers, although not so much against battleships. She has on the outside a 70mm thick armor belt, and if you take a look at her, if I take this away for a second, you'll see that between that outer 70mm armor belt, there's a bit of space. Not that torpedo bulge. There's a bit of space before you reach the inside actual citadel piece of armor. So her armor protection, again, if you angle, is generally quite effective against cruisers. There are, however, times where I feel, and this is very hard to test because I've tried to test this, there are some times where I feel like I should have taken citadels from other cruisers. That didn't happen, and I have a feeling that might be the effect of this potential spacing. Some of the lower tier cruisers, for example, have relatively short detonator timers, so it is very possible that if you angle well, and not in the auto bounce territory yet, that the penetration of the guns at certain ranges might barely pass through your outer angled armor belt before just simply detonating inside that space, causing penetrations rather than a citadel hit. So Duca D'Aosta's armor is okay. Do point out that if you do give people a broadside, you will get punished. The citadel is very long, and it does stick out above the water. So, you know, armor can be trollish at times, but still vulnerable if you are caught out of position. Aside from that, in terms of torpedo protection, well, nothing really all that special. With the damage control mod 1, she's got 10%, so 10% torpedo reduction isn't all that great, right? But then again, she's a cruiser, so you should be dodging those torpedoes more than just eating them. Where the Duca D'Aosta, however, is really sort of unique would be her guns. And what's special about her guns is really high velocity armor piercing. But all in all, overall, her guns are a bit of a mixed bag, right? So the armor piercing has very fast initial shell velocity, 1,000 meters per second. It's incredible, very good. However, if you look at the shell details and everything in a little bit more detail, you notice that her shell weight's actually kind of average, and her shell's Krupp values are actually a little bit on the low end. My guess is if we actually see the final penetration numbers with this kind of velocity, with that shell weight, the Krupp, and so we're not exactly sure what the air drag value is, but it seems to be okay, rather standard. My guess is that her armor piercing penetration will look similar to what the Battioni has. Also, her armor piercing with that kind of velocity, you will find that it's reasonably easy to hit things at range. One final point is that her armor piercing's shell damage of 3,200 is, well, it's okay. It's kind of meh. But she definitely has flaws with her guns as well. First of all, the turrets don't really traverse all that quickly. And you'll find that with the ship, if you're trying to shoot and maneuver, the turrets don't really keep up. They're pretty slow, 180-degree turn time of 30 seconds. Yes, it does get a little bit better with expert marksman, but pretty annoying nonetheless, just to have these, you know, pretty slow turrets on a cruiser, which, you know, especially with the way that the ship, I guess, could be played, you kind of do want a little bit faster turret traverse. The other issue, of course, is her HE. The Duca D'Aosta's HE, not AP, HE, is pretty anemic. And if you're a tier 6 and tier 5, your HE is okay, and same with your AP, right? In fact, your AP is great when you're dealing with mostly tier 5, tier 6 ships. But if you keep going up and you start dealing with tier 7s, and especially tier 8 ships, well, then you run into the issue where your HE is just really, really bad. It's just utterly anemic. Your damage on your HE isn't all that amazing. That's one thing. And of course, the second thing is your fire chance just really sucks. You've got... It's just really low fire chance. I mean, with Demolition Expert and flags, you get a maximum of 10%. And that is just nothing to write home about. It's the lowest fire chance of any of the tier 6 cruisers in the game right now. So dealing with higher tier ships that are giving you, let's say, an angled profile, you're really going to suffer. In terms of rate of fire, the Duca D'Aosta is actually pretty standard. 7.5 second reloads are quite standard when you compare it to the other cruisers in the game. And not only that, but 14 kilometer range is also quite reasonable for tier 6. But again, if you get up tier to tier 8, you're going to really struggle. So you got to keep that in mind. The ship it'll struggle at the higher tiers. It's pretty good when you're at tier 5, 6, maybe 7, but 8 really becomes difficult. Your gun arcs on the ship are absolutely phenomenal. You have some of the best gun arcs of any of the tier 6 cruisers in the game. You can bring all of your guns to action at only giving the enemy a 30-degree angle to the front, and your guns can bring all of your guns to bear at 149 degrees to the aft. So very, very good gun arcs overall, and you should be able to feel that that's quite comfortable to get your guns into action and then get yourself back into something that's a little bit more safe and angled. So that's really all there is to say about the guns. She also does have torpedoes. They're pretty good oh shit weapons. They go 4.5 kilometers and they go at 66 knots. They're pretty fast. They don't really hit all that hard, 13,367 max damage per torp. And so I would say that they're pretty good at dealing with maybe destroyers and cruisers, although they're not all that great against battleships. The reload, however, because these are triple set torpedoes, are reasonably fast, and the torpedo arcs are absolutely phenomenal. So, if you're playing on a more aggressive style where you're a little bit up more close to the enemy, you will find that you can use these torpedoes and engage enemy ships. The AA on the Duca D'Aosta is absolutely pathetic. You just don't have all that much. Yeah, a little bit here and there, but just it's not really all that amazing AA. And this is where you also have a choice later on when it comes to consumables, right? It's like if you're going to play highly aggressive, more up close, engaging maybe destroyers, you might want to opt for Hydro. But if you're a little bit further back, maybe playing a support cruiser with battleships, you might want to opt for defensive fire instead. You just need something to deal with those aircraft that do come towards you. She is a super fast cruiser. I believe she is the fastest tier 6 cruiser in the game, going 36.5 knots without any speed flags. So she's very, very zippy. She's also quite an agile cruiser, although the turning circle radius and rudder shift times, well, they're okay. They're just kind of average and meh. They're kind of just very standard to a lot of the other tier 6 cruisers. But overall, I found her to be a reasonably agile ship, and with that good speed, you can, keyword, kite away from things. And as long as you keep wiggling and dodging, you should be able to do okay. Her surface detectability of 11.7 kilometers is definitely workable, but definitely benefits from having Concealment Expert, a skill that I actually didn't have, and there are times where I really wish I did. So this is a ship that I think Concealment Expert would really, really help. In terms of upgrade modules, again, if you're playing more passive defensive, you might want to bring defensive AA fire. If you're playing more aggressive, maybe bring hydroacoustic search. In terms of your upgrades, pretty standard. Main armaments mod 1, go for aiming systems mod 1, go damage control system mod 1, and go steering gears mod 2. This will make your ship pretty agile and pretty good overall. In terms of your captain skills, depending, and it's very, very important here to keep this in mind, is that for captain skills, your first 10 points are pretty standard. Priority target, adrenaline rush, demolition expert, concealment. That's your first 10. With your next 2 points, you probably want to get expert marksman just to make those turrets traverse a little bit faster. But then you really have to decide on a style issue. So if you're going to play more aggressive, you might want to consider things like torpedo armament expertise, and maybe even RPF will be somewhat useful there. And of course, make sure you pack hydro, so playing that aggressive style. If you're playing a more passive style, you might want to consider something like IFHE, or really whatever else you would kind of want to bring along, and of course bring defensive fire. With IFHE, though, do keep in mind that your fire chance is probably going to be in the gutter even more than what you have right now, although she does penetrate a little bit more. So all in all, a bit of a mixed bag, and the best way I would be able to put her right now is this is a cruiser that really has to mesh with your style of play, and if your style of play meshes with her, you're going to do quite well with her. If your style of play doesn't mesh with the ship, I think she's going to just end up becoming a port decoration. I mean, she is very pretty, like, you know, giant barber pole, yeah, candy cane, I don't know, all kinds of cute names for the ship. But you know, if she doesn't fit and doesn't really gel sort of with your style of play, she might be a ship that just ends up sitting in your port forever and you never really play her. However, if she works with your style, then I think you're going to find her to be a pretty exciting, enjoyable ship to play. As you know, there's definitely sort of more like, you know, moments when I was playing her, you know, getting up close to things. So definitely something for you to consider. Alright, that's everything from the port view. Let's take a look at how she does in battle. Alright, so let's look at the optimal kind of battle for the Duca. The optimal kind of battle for the Duca is where you're in, you know, a tier 6 battle with maybe like tier 5 carriers or whatever, and basically you're top tier. This is the battle where you are probably going to be the happiest. You know, at this tier, your HE still capable of doing pretty reasonable damage without IFHE, which means you still maintain that reasonably good fire chance. Your AP works against cruisers pretty effectively at this tier. Even your absolutely crap A can shoot down a couple of planes when you have defensive fire active. So this is sort of your happy place, right? If you're playing the Duca, this is your happy place. And why not, right? This is the tier where you're just pretty good all around. It's when you take her up, right, that she really runs into problems. You take the Duca to tier 7, you still might be okay there. You take her to tier 8, and it's like, oh, come on. And I'll show you, you know, a tier 8 battle as well, and sort of the overall levels of frustration that I would experience when I'm playing at the higher tiers. Like, there's so many things that you're just not as comfortable doing versus in these lower tier battles, you know. A lot of players at the higher tiers, you know, their aim is a little bit better. They don't do as potato things that you see sometimes down at tier 5 and 6, you know. You have carrier players who know how to exploit the weaknesses in your AA. You have battleships and other cruisers whose penetration is far, far, far more lethal than what you will find down at tier 5 and 6. So it's like in those kinds of environments, you will suffer quite a bit more. At this tier, things are pretty much okay. You know, here I am, kiting a little bit away from that Fuso, dropping some HE on him, and you'll see me getting some reasonable damage through penetrations, and I'll set a couple fires, you know, getting some good numbers there. Generally speaking, though, with the Duca, battleships really aren't your main targets. You're very, very well suited to killing off other cruisers, although I'm not fully convinced about her capabilities against destroyers. I find that in a lot of cases, especially when destroyers are maybe trying to run away from you, having only 4 guns forward, plus the fact that your HE is pretty bad, is not usually all that great for destroyers. I've tried using AP on destroyers as well. Yeah, sometimes you get sort of mixed results there. Sometimes you get a good couple of penetrations, that's quite a bit of damage, and other times you just get bounces. So, you know, her AP doesn't have the special sort of auto bounce angles that like the British AP has. Everything else about her AP just feels quite normal, just, you know, excluding the fact that they go out like a rocket. You know, they have that very, very high initial muzzle velocity. Very good, again, for killing cruisers, but I do question the value against destroyers sometimes, and against battleships they're somewhat iffy, right? Now, earlier I did mention that she does have these sort of OSHA torpedoes, and they are going to come in handy in a second, right? If you take a look at the mini-map, there is a DD there, and unfortunately at the time, I don't know what I was doing, but I just wasn't paying attention, so suddenly, you know, I saw Farragut, I'm like, oh, crap, pulled out the torpedoes, dumped a salvo. Torpedoes are nice and fast, so that's good. Had AP loaded, because I don't even know. I think I was just distracted at this one point in time, so Did a couple of things wrong, but still managed to tag the destroyer with that torpedo. Torpedoes are fast, so sometimes they don't get as much reaction time as if you had like a slower set of torpedoes. So that was good. Alright, gonna come out here and I'm gonna catch myself a Leander that's not really moving all that much. And these are sort of the ideal targets for the Duca. You get in there and you get these nice citadel hits, and these cruisers, especially if they're giving you these good shots, you really can land some good damage. I also did mention that the armor can sometimes be a little bit troll, right? Keep an eye on that Koenig. The Koenig is going to be shooting at me, and on more than just maybe one occasion, I thought, oh, I'm dead. He's got me with the salvo, and like ended up only taking like a couple thousand damage. It's like, oh, okay, it's not bad. So yeah, it's just sometimes the armor does some weird things, but still, in terms of your ability to survive, in most cases, it's going to be your ability to bait shots and to dodge and to weave. Your armor can help randomly on occasion, but again, not something you want to depend on all the time. Also, the armor is generally a little bit more reliable when you're at the lower tiers. If you go up, it becomes a lot less reliable. Run into ships like Bismarcks or Alabamas, you're just kind of in for not the world's best day. Now, I do think that perhaps my playing experience would have been better if I immediately started off with, let's say, 15-point captain, had concealment expert, had all the skills, but I actually started playing her with only a 3-point captain just to see what would feel like if you were somebody who was going to be playing the ship, after you bought her with a brand new Italian captain. And yeah, she's not that easy to play when you don't have a lot of the skills, especially when you get up-tiered. And for like my first 10 battles, I think I got one tier 6 battle. All the others were just up-tiered. And I guess maybe that's one of the other issues with the ship right now. Tier 6 matchmaking just isn't all that great, and you do tend to get into those higher tier battles. And those higher tier battles, like I mentioned earlier, like when you don't have maybe IFHE, for example, as a skill, and also combined with the fact that your fire chance will become really low with that skill, and even without, it's still pretty low, it does feel kind of pathetic. You really are going to end up struggling if you run into teams full of tier 8 ships. And in a lot of those battles, what I realized at the end is that I was going around and just trying to pick on other tier 6 ships that basically queued in with me, or maybe the occasional tier 7. But all in all, they were struggles. Those tier 8 battles were real struggles. It was a struggle to try to do damage. It was a struggle to find a place that I could engage from in a more comfortable sort of scenario. Just all in all, just not the best type of ship really to go into tier 8 battles and constantly maybe do really, really well. I've had some pretty decent battles in tier 8, but not 100% convinced about the ship in those higher tier battles. Although, I do have to say that if you are looking again for a ship that's reasonably fun and exciting at the lower tiers, tier 5, 6, then go for it. She does have those fun moments to her, especially like, for example, earlier against that destroyer, or in some cases when you're rushing down a ship or something like that and you manage to get your torpedoes off and you sink them. It is an enjoyable experience there. But again, when you're dealing with tier 8s, for example, it's like you can drop your torpedoes and they might not sink, and then it becomes a little bit more dicey, right? So yeah, aside from all that, I've been playing Ring Around the Rosie with this Koenig and was hoping to get some torpedoes into him. And in case if you were paying attention to the torpedo arcs, the arcs themselves are actually really, really good. There's pretty good arc to the front and to the rear, so you're able to maybe, kind of in close range island fights like that, maybe have pushed in and maybe got some torpedoes off. I think in this particular case, what I should have actually done was probably go around the island around sort of F2. I actually should have gone around, and maybe I would have caught that Koenig unaware and probably could have dropped some torpedoes on him. He does seem a little bit preoccupied with the other cruiser on my team right now. Unfortunately, at the time, I think I got a little target fixated on this Texas, and it might have been just because when I first fired HE on him, I actually got some respectable damage from him, and I was just like, oh, okay, he's going to provide me with some damage, go get him. So, might have been a little bit, just a little bit target fixated, right? So, yeah, I get a couple shots in on him, and you see I am able to do some penetration damage, and of course he also burned my first fire, which is not really the smartest thing to do. and I was able to essentially, I think later on, get some more fire, so I was able to get a bunch more damage. Yeah, there it is, fire. Got double fire that time, so that was really, really sweet. You are very dependent, by the way. You are very, very dependent on that fire chance, and again, like I said, if you're dealing with lower tier or equal tier ships, the fire chance, it's not great, but it's not like atrocious. But you run into those tier 8 ships and it's like, your HE and fire chances, well, atrocious. I think atrocious would be a very, very good way to describe it. Still collecting some more damage from the Texas, and again, like, I mean, the AA is just painful. I mean, against tier 5 Bogue bombers with defensive fire enabled, I'm still like eating bomb hits, and I wasn't shooting down that many of them, right? So something you really do have to keep in mind. You know, if the CV decides that your day is gonna end, yeah, it's pretty painful all the way around. Now, unfortunately, this battle actually ended up being a loss. The enemy 2 carriers were actually pretty good, and they were ending, like, once they got rid of me, they just went about and just dominated our battleship. So ended up being a loss. Still managed to get a pretty respectable amount of damage there on this battle, 109,000. And so what we're going to do is we're going to transition from sort of these more ideal battles to things that are maybe a little bit less than ideal. So let's take a look at how that battle might look like, and then I'll give you sort of some final thoughts and wrap things up. Alright, moving on, and we're looking at a tier 8 battle. And in tier 8 battles, my experience with them tends to be, well, not so good with the Duca. I mean, yeah, if you get ships that are giving you broadside, like this Ganai, for example, yeah, you can still do some good damage, right? Your HE will do some decent damage, and your AP can actually do some rather solid damage, actually. Again, like I said, the AP does have some pretty good penetration, right? As you can see, I'm going to be able to get somewhere around maybe 4,000 damage, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 damage a salvo here against that Ganai. So, you know, if people are giving you the broadside, damage is fine. However, as you go up to about, you know, these higher tier battles, well, more often than not, you find ships that give you these, you know, more angled profiles. And when that happens, well, then the struggle kind of begins, right? Like I mentioned earlier, the Duca, while it does have very, very good AP performance, its HE performance is pretty anemic. So if people start to go bow in and, you know, try to angle and things like that, and your AP isn't as effective, then you gotta really resort to your HE. And in that case, since you don't really output as many shells, and plus your shells aren't all that great in terms of damage and everything, you're gonna have to, let's say, struggle a bit, is the best way to put it. However, this particular, I guess, battle did really show the superb agility of the ship. I mean, later on, I'm pretty sure I was confident that I was screwed. The enemy had so many ships closing me down, and I just thought I didn't have a chance. In fact, I almost had a bit of a feeling that maybe they were just all coming after me. But I was able to sort of just continue to dodge and weave and dodge and weave, and I was able to survive for, well, the remainder of the battle, even after being chased by a bunch of ships that probably would have guaranteed my death. And yes, I am still conducting the occasional penguin expedition, going onto these islands filled with ice and snow looking for certain things. No, I'm just kidding. No, what ended up happening is I just didn't want to go out and give that Fiji a broadside, so I wanted to turn north, so when I came out to him, I would be at a nice angle. And when I looked at the mini-map, I just did not see this tiny little dot. Just something silly. Just didn't see that little dot that was the island and just ran into it. Oh well, stuff happens. Alright, so heading north. Now, over here, we've got an enemy Fiji, we've got an enemy at Tago, there's a Sims, and there's a Ganai coming up. And with me is a Fuso, and then there is me. So here is the part where I think this is like one of the earlier games I played with the Duca, and I was pretty impressed by, you know, her overall responsiveness and agility, and I was like, wow, you know, this is pretty nice. And also pretty sure during this battle I was like, wow, her armor can do some really weird things sometimes. Arcs are really nice, as you can tell with those torpedoes. The rear arc is pretty good. Forward arc is also very, very good. Again, you know, when people are angled against you, armor piercing just isn't all that great, so you really do have to go to your HE, but again, HE damage, yeah, it's a little iffy, you know. the main sort of thing for the Duca is really its armor piercing, and so its HE is sort of much more like you do have to go to your HE a lot, right? But it's not. I don't know. It's not that great damage wise. You know, she just doesn't output damage that quickly, which is also one of the problems that I experienced when I was trying to go after destroyers. A lot of times it just felt like, God, why do I just feel like I'm like tickling these DDs that like, you know, I'm tickling them with like a feather or something that they can just actually get away from me. It was a very disconcerting feeling, you know, like, and I think part of that might be just the way that the guns are positioned, for example, on this particular ship, where the Duca's guns are like, you know, 2 dual turrets in the front, 2 dual turrets in the back, where compared to something like Cleveland or Badioni, where you have like the 2 triples in the front, then, you know, if you're chasing a DD, there's quite a lot of firepower here. With the Duca, yeah, it's just sometimes you feel like, oh, wish I had maybe the extra 2 barrels, you know, but it's not going to happen, right? Anyways, continue to sort of try to get away from the ships, slinging whatever shells I can, continue to keep myself as angled as possible, looking for the opportunity to bring guns to bear to maybe do more damage. First target that gives me that opportunity is actually the Fiji. Fiji gives a little bit of a broadside. Unfortunately, I just don't think I get that shot perfectly. No Citadel hits. Fiji goes angled, and of course with British awesome turn rates, totally misjudged that shot. So one more for the finish here, and there we go. So that is kill number 1. All right, now my attention goes from that Fiji, which was the closest target, the one that I could probably deal with right away, to now how do I deal with the Ganai that's over here and the Otago that's further to the south. Of course, taking a look at the targets, Otago is the one that's much more angled. The Ganai, well, a little bit more broadside, so putting damage into the Ganai. All the while, trying to do my absolute best to keep mobile, to keep moving, trying to minimize the, let's just say, the directions that I might take potential lethal fire from, right? And of course that mostly is going to be coming from that Ganai. Again, Ganai continue to give me a good amount of broadside, so putting in another salvo there, and as you can see, about 4,000 damage in that one, 5 penetration. So like, you know, if people are giving you broadsides, you can definitely do some pretty good damage. But again, like I said, when you get to slightly higher tiers, you'll find less people giving you those broadsides, so sometimes you really do have to depend on your high explosive. So in this case, the Otago that's giving me basically only a bow. I am just going to try and get as many shots into him as possible. I really want to take the Otago down, because if I can take the Otago down, at least I can eliminate the threat on this one flank, right? The Ganai, as long as I keep sort of dodging and weaving and making it difficult for him, I might not take as much damage from him. But this Otago, if he decides to go, let's say, with a good armor-piercing salvo and I give him just enough of a broadside, well, he could end my day. The minute, of course, he gives me a broadside, I am going to hit him with armor-piercing. Unfortunately, no Citadel. Although I've gotten Citadel on other Otagos at that distance in the past, so, you know, Duca is definitely capable of doing that. Alright, Otago gets finished off, and then basically I turn around, I focus all my attention onto that Ganai, pop as many shots into him as possible, and try and just rack up as much damage. But of course, by this point in time, my team is just going to handily win, just gotten all the caps, so pretty easy victory there. And damage total at the end wasn't all that bad. Alright, so some final thoughts on the Duca. I think this is a ship that's not really for everyone. She's a ship that requires a certain kind of playstyle. She also requires the players to have a good situational awareness and also good map awareness. You know, you have to really know where you are going to be best utilized. She also requires you to be comfortable both in terms of being a little passive, maybe kiting, but also to be comfortable playing aggressive when you need to. And so she does pose a quite an interesting challenge in that sense, right? I mean, you know, if you're somebody who always tends to play passive, not really going to be your ship. If you're hyper aggressive, this is not going to really be your ship, because you're going to get killed really, really quickly as well. All in all, though, I still think she's a fun ship, but I do think you should really look at your own style of play before deciding whether you want to get her or not. Anyways, folks, I hope you enjoyed this ship review, whichever one you prefer. Aside from all that, take care, have a good one, and I will talk to all of you again really, really soon.